Sophie Hardy and the Battle of the Myriad by M.R. Dale. Narrated by Leona Hall. Chapter 26. Who is she actually? Who exactly is Manita? She can't be normal like us, Sophie asked Miss Sissons, as Manita was still ripping Meliora to shreds and not thinking twice about it. She's a child that Mr. King found, Miss Sissons replied. Every child I have suggested since you got implanted has been completely ignored. Sophie thought for a moment. What makes Manita different to us? She asked anyone that might be able to offer up an answer. The room was silent as Kingsley, Clara, Yasmin and Miss Sissons thought, and Lizzie still sat there not responding to anything. Lizzie's appearance of being shell-shocked and upset didn't register with Sophie yet, and she carried on hypothesising. If King decided having children like us wasn't working as we broke too many rules and didn't do as we were told, then there must be something about Manita which makes him think differently. Why can she be controlled? Sophie continued. Have we got any records on her? Being a teenager, she must be registered at a secondary school somewhere in the country, even if she didn't have an implant, Clara asked. That would make her stand out even more, wouldn't it? Not having an implant. Was there even anyone that wasn't given one? Yasmin asked. Barely any, Sophie added, sounding slightly more excited than she had done a moment ago. I'll get on it, Miss Sisson said. There can't be many children in the country called Manita either. Sophie shuddered at the idea of insulting Manita's name. Miss Sissons hadn't meant it nastily, but from what she had said earlier, it made Sophie feel bad, and she turned away from the others. It was at that point of brief respite that Sophie noticed her sister curled up on a chair at the enormous Scope HQ table. Lizzie wasn't moving much and had her hands curled round her knees, which were hunched up on the chair. Cautiously, Sophie walked over. Sophie went to put her hand on Lizzie's shoulder, knowing it would just go through, but that didn't stop Lizzie from jumping a mile into the air in shock. Hey, Sophie said softly. What's wrong? Lizzie didn't say anything. She simply shook her head to imply that either nothing was the matter and that she was fine, or she didn't want to talk about it. Sophie guessed from her sister's posture that something was quite clearly up. What is it? Sophie asked again very conscientiously. Lizzie stared forward, like how Sophie had done when Mrs. Phoenix and Mrs. Jones had asked her about life at home last week. With that in mind, Sophie knew she had to push a button to get a response. You can go home if you like, Sophie said, knowing full well that her sister wouldn't want to. Lizzie didn't stop staring forward, but did say, I want to stay here with you. I want to be an agent. Sophie leant forward and gave her the best hug she could with Lizzie's soft light avatar. Lizzie didn't reciprocate, but the hug did act as a catalyst for lots more to come out. It was all too loud, too dangerous and scary, Lizzie said, and so Sophie pretend hugged her even more tightly, and at that, Lizzie started to wriggle uncomfortably. Sophie wanted to say that it was okay, but she could see it wasn't, and knew that that wouldn't be what Lizzie wanted to hear. Seeing her sister as a mess like this made the stomach-turning feeling that Sophie was suffering with come back. Her sister shouldn't be like this. She was only here because of a mistake on Sophie's part. If Sophie had handled Desmeralda differently, Lizzie might still have been her baby sister and not her near twin, who was massively upset by a horror of a situation that Sophie had put her in well before she was ready. Furthermore, from what Sophie had seen today, she might never be ready for. Before Lizzie could utter another word, a shout came from up the stairs where Miss Sissons and the rest were. I've got nothing, was the message that none of them wanted to hear. Sophie came out of the hug and held out a hand for Lizzie to take to lead her back to where everyone else was, but unsurprisingly to Sophie, Lizzie refused, even though she wouldn't actually be touching Sophie. The pair made their way back to the rest of the group. Sophie stood in the circle after helping Lizzie find another chair at the side. Lizzie did want to take part in the discussion, but also didn't want to be left completely on her own. There is no child named Manita that fits the description of being at a secondary school with no implant. There are 6 other Manitas in the country of that age, but that girl out there isn't one of them, Miss Sisson said. Well, she is in her avatar. She might look completely different in real life, Clara replied. Check that already. The other 6 Manitas aged 11 to 16 out there did not lose anyone last week. All their family members are still here, Miss Sisson shrugged. False name? Yasmin asked. No, Sophie replied. When she introduced herself to me, she had no reason to lie about that. Then, who is she? Kingsley asked. Sophie joined the rest of the group in a long, hard thought. Why wasn't Manita known to Scope if she should have had an implant by now? She thought back to what King had said when she first met her. She was borrowing someone else's, and that meant she didn't vanish. That didn't make any sense. Sophie then considered if that last sentence had been a lie, then what would make a good truth? Mynitta was over 11, but wasn't wearing an implant and hadn't disappeared. That also didn't make sense, as everyone else over 11 without an implant in the world had vanished, and Mynitta hadn't. She should have just disappeared with the others if that were true. So, Sophie then assumed that that was a lie as well. The group was looking for someone who wasn't on Scope's list of people getting or already owning an implant, who hadn't been wearing an implant on the day of the vanishing, and could be easily manipulated by Alton King. Thinking hard, Sophie scanned the room, then it hit her as she gazed upon her upset sister. "What if she isn't a teenager?" she suggested. The rest of the group looked to her like they needed some more explanation than that throwaway sentence. Sophie didn't give one, she just pointed at Lizzie. It took a while for the penny to drop with some, but eventually they all reached the same conclusion Sophie had. What if 10 days ago, Mynitta was just a kid, a really young kid? Sophie continued. Clara was the first to jump on Sophie's train of thought. Would explain how King could easily manipulate her, and why she didn't vanish, Yasmin added. He could raise her how he wanted, telling her whatever truth he needed to in order to get her to do what he needed, Sophie finished. He'd be like a surrogate dad to her, Clara added. And he made her live so many years in the space of 2 real hours, Yasmin concluded. Her mind will be all over the place. The more the group thought about it, the more it made sense. Mynitta hadn't disappeared last week, even though she wasn't wearing an implant, because she had only been a child and therefore was in no danger of vanishing, just aging. If she really was young, with no experience of the outside world, then it would be easy for King to influence her beliefs in a way that he couldn't with Sophie and the rest, what with them being a lot older and that bit worldlier wise. On top of that, if she had spent years in training with King over the course of just a few hours, it would explain why she acted older and wanted her avatar to look more like a teenager than a child she actually was, and how she could handle the battle better than Lizzie could, who, from what Sophie could see, had just gone back to being the little girl that she actually was. What about her parents? Kingsley rightly asked. If she had spent that long in training, wouldn't they notice? Well, just look at our parents, Sophie replied, pointing at herself and Lizzie. Dad, Sophie stuttered briefly, disappeared, and Mum lets us do what we want without caring. Yasmin then added in with her family situation. And my mum and dad are constantly at work, so they don't monitor me, and apparently my dad is off-world anyway. It was Clara, though, who it seemed to hit on the most realistic possibility. What if both parents aren't there anymore? Doesn't have to be that they both vanished last week. Maybe they just aren't in her life at all. The group went silent as the realisation that Clara might be right, and just how evil what King had done potentially was, all in an effort to save his company's reputation. We need to find where Mynitta is, Sophie instructed. She's in Meliora, Yasmin replied. No, where she really is, Sophie explained. What about King? Kingsley asked, before Miss Sissons could say what she wanted to. If we can find where he is, we can find Mynitta's location, Sophie guessed, still not allowing Miss Sissons to get a word in edgeways. I can help with that, Miss Sissons said, finally getting a chance to join in with her ideas. She typed up a message and sent it to the children. These are the coordinates where Mr. King is and where he is holding me. Put this time dilator on him before his avatar escapes that kraken and you'll be fine. She then handed the time dilator to Kingsley. Yaz, you should be able to work whatever computer he has got there and find the location of the 3 children. The group nodded in acceptance of what Miss Sissons had said, and all agreed that Alton King's family home was the best place to go now. What about Lizzie? Clara whispered to Sophie, temporarily forgetting what else she could find at the place they were going to. I'll take care of her, Miss Sissons replied, reassuringly. Sophie felt a lot more secure that her sister was in the hands of her teacher and opened the message she had sent to make sure it was correct. Yasmin and Kingsley did the same. Clara did as well, but after she had read the numbers in the coordinates, she felt they looked very familiar to the one she had received earlier on that day. These, Clara began to say, with a huge sense of excitement tinged with trepidation. Then she caught sight of Miss Sissons, who was nodding with a look of understanding on her face. Now is the right time to go and find them, she said, and the rest of the group looked at Clara and joined in the smiling as they realised what was going on. Go and find them while King is locked inside that kraken. Good luck, Miss Sissons said to all of them, as they all zoned out to Alton King's house, save for Kingsley, who portaled, and Sophie, who went back over to Lizzie. I'll be back soon, she said, trying to look Lizzie in the eye. Lizzie didn't say anything. She just nodded and continued to stare straight forwards. Sophie turned to Miss Sissons, who just smiled at her. It was all the reassurance she needed, and she zoned out to join the others in the house of Alton King. The Sophie Hardy saga was written and produced by M.R. Dale and narrated and produced by Leona Hall. If you enjoyed it and would like to continue to follow the adventures of Sophie and her friends in coming episodes, then please subscribe through one of the many podcast providers out there. The links for each of these can be found on our website. If you require more information, visit our many social media channels, or if you would like to purchase a copy of the book, then be sure to check out our website, www.sophiehardysaga.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy.